I can't really fall asleep, so I wanted to sit and talk a little bit about perhaps something that may be of use to you. I don't know. Um, I have recently decided to adopt another cat. Um, my cat died a little bit more than 4 years ago, and I don't really like to talk about it because obviously, it was upsetting. Of course it was. But um, as a single man who has chosen to live alone, um, it was a very difficult thing. And I wasn't, only until recently have I ever really begun to think of possibly ever adopting again. I was actually, for a long time, I was really sure that I wouldn't ever adopt a cat again. So I just wanted to talk a little bit for those who may be up still, as I am. I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about Frank and just because I want to talk about Frank because I'm the problem with, I guess, anyone, animals or otherwise, who leave us. Over time, the memories become more remote, less immediate. You know, they they start to ossify a little bit, and pretty soon, when you talk about them, you really only remember as far as the last time you told that story. And I'm eager to sort of get down my thoughts while I have them. Um, so I grew up with cats. We grew up with I grew up with cats and dogs. We had cats and dogs growing up, and our cats were always outdoor cats. They were family cats. They were family cats, of course. They enjoyed being with us, but we never had litter boxes growing up because there were cat doors, and they could go outside and do their thing, and so there was a bit of freedom there. So um, in 2005, I had moved back to California after living in Colorado for about a year, and that was a challenging time. And I moved back to California, to my home state. My Can you see? And I was lonely. I was really very unhappy, and trying to sort of find my way. And I thought, I think I'd like to have a cat. I think I'd like to have a kitty cat to care for and love. And at that time, I was working a lot. I was serving. I was waiting tables for a living, and I worked about 6 days a week because I needed the money. Let's face it. And anyway, I had so I worked 4th of July, and then the next day was a Tuesday. It was a beautiful Tuesday in San Diego, and I decided that I was going to go ahead and get up and adopt a cat. So I did. I got up and I went to Target, like you do, and I bought toys and litter and food and everything that I thought I might possibly need. And then I went to the San Diego County Humane Society. And I don't know what I was doing. I'd never done this before, and so I went and uh, met a couple cats and enjoyed them. And I finally told the volunteer, what I'm looking for is an animal who will be content to live indoors. At that time, this was 15 years ago. At that time, I was convinced I would not be a property owner anytime soon. With a yard, as I'd grown up with a space for a cat to roam free. And I was quite right, because here we are 15 years later, and I'm still renting. Um, and I wanted to make sure that whatever cat that I adopted would be content to be where he was, or she. Whoever, you know. And she said, "I have the cat for you." and she led me to a large room with all kinds of, you know, things. You know, all kinds of things for cats to play on. There were probably like 10 cats in there, whatever. And she said, if you sit in that chair, motioning toward a chair in the middle of the room, she said, if you sit in that chair, Weston will come sit on your lap. And so I did. I went and sat down on the chair, and a black cat named Weston came and as she predicted, sat on my lap and just enjoyed my company, and we enjoyed each other, and I said, all right, I'll take him. So I paid whatever, I mean $20, $25, whatever the adoption fee was. And he was packaged up in a cardboard carrier, which he hated, by the way. That was the funny bit. I mean, it didn't take, it probably took me 10 minutes to get home. I renamed him Frank. He was named Frank because of the one of the lead characters in Donnie Darko. I'd wanted to have a cat named Gus. Like when I walked in that day to the Humane Society, I wanted to have a cat named Gus. But he wasn't a Gus. He just wasn't. He was enormous. He was not an enormous cat this way. He was just very long. You know, he's just a very long and lithe animal. Which was to his advantage when he was sitting in the front seat on the way home in his carrier, because he hated that carrier. And he had his long arms just reaching out and trying to find his way out. Anyway, we got him home, and he went immediately under a table and then under the bed. He, you know, of course, whenever you change a cat's geographical location, they need a second to get acclimated. And so he went under the table next to the couch, and I could go up to him and he would be very friendly. I mean, he needed to be protected, but he wasn't, you know, if you would go up to him and pet him or whatever, he was all for it. You know, he just needed to be protected. But within a really short amount of time, he started, you know, sleeping on the bed with me. And he started doing something. I wish I could claim credit for teaching him this. But he loved to, you know, when I would reach out my hand to pet him, you know, he would grab on with both of his paws. And he would mash my hand into his head. He loved that. Loved it. And he did that his whole life. In fact, I'm convinced that he never was taught this. This was just something that he did through intuition. Having said that, and I still have his adoption paperwork, he was an owner surrender, which was what he was. I can only, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine anyone surrendering this animal, but I can only imagine that his previous owner perhaps was moving to a place where he couldn't take him, and surrendered him to the Humane Society. That's the only thing that makes sense in my head. Because certainly he wasn't surrendered because of behavioral issues, because he never had one behavioral issue as long as he lived. Anyway, so he lived with me in San Diego while I was there. And then later I decided that it was time for me to move in with my folks for a while. Just a couple hours up the road. And I told my folks before I moved back in, I was like, this is not a permanent situation. Here is when I'm going to move out. And I did. And I was quite emotional when I decided to leave California and go to Chicago, where I am now. In fact, I'm in the same apartment I was in over 13 years ago when I decided to move. And it was very difficult because, you know, as I mentioned, Frank really hated his carrier. He hated that thing. He hated being bound, you know, structurally. He hated it. And that was no good for me because I was so emotional going from California to Chicago, and I've got this poor animal who I'm in charge of. I mean, that was the thing. when I adopted him to begin with, I was terrified. I mean, God only knows what parents go through. I mean, heavens. But I was terrified. You know, I had this poor little animal who's relying on me, you know, for safety. And there I am in the driver's seat driving from California to Chicago, sobbing the whole way, you know, not knowing what on earth I'm doing. And for 4 days, he cried. He didn't shut up the whole time. The whole time. The whole time he was just in the front seat, crying his eyes out, and it was just, yeah, anyway. So here we were in Chicago. And we had many good years. The thing I really loved about Frank was that he liked people, but he wasn't gregarious. He enjoyed having people in the apartment, but he liked to have his space. He liked to have a chair that he could sit on, a separate space to be, while everybody was there. And that's a little bit like me, to be honest. You know, I'm social, but I like to have a defined space where I can be. And so he would sit on his chair and just enjoy from a distance. And anyway, unfortunately, in November 14th, was it 14th? 14th or 13th? I don't remember. 14th. It was the 14th. Yeah, November 14th. It was a Monday. Yeah, it was a Monday. I came home from spending some time with friends, and I found Frank up against. So when you walk in the front door of my apartment, you can see my bedroom door off to the right, and he was slumped against the door, which is very odd because that was not a place that he would always greet me when I walked in the front door. So to see him there was very alarming, and he was scared. He was not. He was frightened. He was having some spasms in his back legs, and it was very frightening for him. It was frightening for me. I mean, I'd never. I didn't know how long he had been that way. However, at the time, I could smell. I used a pine litter. I used to use a pine litter, and he smelled very strongly of his pine litter. So that gave me some hope that he had just recently fallen over because he smelled so strongly of his litter. So that made me feel a bit better. But I picked him up and I took him over to his food and to his water because I was concerned. I didn't know how long it had been since he had eaten or had anything to drink. I didn't know, and it became obvious that whatever he was dealing with was bigger than me, and I had just recently gotten rid of my car, so I couldn't just load him into the car to take him someplace, and so I was frantically, you know, I did update Facebook. I mean, not because I'm like trying to like broadcast my difficulties, but mainly because I didn't know what to do. I don't have a car. It's like 11:30 at night. I don't remember how late it was. It was late. It was late enough that this was a concern. And I as I said, I got him to his food and got him to his water, and I was very grateful to see that he was eating and drinking. You know, of course, because cats, when they're really far gone, they don't even bother. But he was very grateful. But he couldn't stand up, and he had all these spasms, and I was on my phone trying to figure out where the hell I could take this poor cat that was having this issue, and I found MedVet down on Belmont and Clybourne, which is 24 hours. And I mean, to this day, the thing that bothers me the most is the last thing I ever saw of him. I didn't know this was going to be the last thing in my house, but he was crawling on his belly across my kitchen floor trying to get right, and I don't really care for that mental image, but that's what I've got. And I know it's been 4 years, but it still sucks. Um, I'm very sad that that was the last. I mean, because literally, I mean, I called an Uber in those days. I called an Uber, and I picked him up off the kitchen floor and put him in his carrier that he hated so much, and took him off to MedVet. But to this day, the fact that that's the last memory I have of him in this house, I'm not happy about. It still causes me problems. Should probably get over it, but I'm sure I'll get over it at some point. Um, but yeah, he was in the. I left him overnight. I was there for a few hours, and I didn't know how the hell I was going to pay for this. I mean, I didn't know. I didn't know, but fortunately, I have really good credit. I mean, I have a lot of debt, but like I have really good credit, so I was able to get a new credit line to pay for his procedures. And I just said, do whatever you want. I mean, really, because I wanted to know. He's only 13. He's only 13. He wasn't even 13 actually at that time, I think. And I decided to leave because there wasn't anything more I could do, and I was worried that if I took him home, that he would. I mean, he liked to sleep with me in bed, but he was having such issues with his back legs. I was very worried that he would fall, and I was so tired. I was very worried that he would fall off the bed and and I wouldn't be able. I wouldn't wake up. He would fall off and maybe injure himself further, or want to get to his water, get to his food, get to his litter box, and I wouldn't be able to do anything. Anyway, I was told to call at around 7 the next morning, and he unfortunately had gone blind overnight, which was not a welcome. I wasn't happy to hear about that. But on some level, it sort of helped justify my decision to leave him there. And I called work. I was at that time I was waiting tables, and I was also teaching music lessons. And I called my restaurant, and I just said, I'm not going to be able to come in today. And my manager could not have been better about it. And I canceled my lessons, and everyone was just wonderful about it. I do my best not to cancel a lesson unless I have to. And I went down and I spent the day there. And he was blind, but I was able to. They were very gracious with me. And in retrospect, I think everyone knew. I think all the technicians, all the vets that were there, I think they knew. They knew that this was a terminal case. And so they just let me sit with him, and he immediately felt better because he could smell me, and he loved being cradled. He would always wrap himself around my arm when he slept. He would always do that, and so that was really nice for him. And then, gosh, around 2:00 in the afternoon, or so, somewhere around there, they told me that he was ready to be taken up to have they were going to do an ultrasound on him. I authorized an ultrasound. I mean, they told me in the morning, I think it was already in like $900, $1,000, $1,100, whatever. And I was like, just put it on the pile. Just charge me. Just do more procedures. Charge me. I can't afford any of this. You may as well just go ahead, because then at least I'll know. Go ahead. And so I walked up the street to Chipotle, like you do. And I wasn't there more than 15, 20 minutes. And the doctor called me, and he said, he's got a tumor on his kidney. And I just said, what did I do? Did I do anything? Did I do anything to cause this? What did I do wrong? Because the last 2 years before Frank died were not happy years in my house at all. They were bad years, and um I didn't care for him the way that I could have done. There's a line from 6 Feet Under that I think about a lot. It's just so many moments when I could have loved you better, and that's what I think about. There's times that I could have been more attentive instead of wallowing in my own whatever it was that I was dealing with. But the doctor said, it's cancer, buddy. Like, and I made the decision to have him euthanized because I just didn't see the point. He wouldn't have had any quality of life whatsoever, even if I'd authorized any kind of. And I hope someone in my future loves me enough to make the same choice. It was a horrible choice to make at the time. Horrible. But in retrospect, as terrible of a choice as it was, I'm glad I made it. Because there wouldn't have been any quality of life afterward. And I walked down back to MedVet to say goodbye. Just bizarre. I mean, this is 18 hours after I found him next to my door. And they were fabulous. I mean, I can't shut up. MedVet on Belmont and Clybourne, Chicago, Illinois, the best. Because I went down and they took me into a room. I wish I had done more preparation. I have all kinds of pictures, but here I am just yammering at you because it's late and I needed somebody to talk to. So if you're out there, thanks for listening. I walked into the room and then they brought him in and they allowed me. I was with him an hour. I just sat in the room with him. Just got to be with him. And while I was doing that, this is, of course, a very tender time. I had, of course, administrative things to attend to, so they brought in paperwork. Of course, I had to authorize the cremation and I had final expenses. Let's face it. I mean, I think out the door, I think the whole thing cost me $1,600. I mean, what the hell do I care? I mean, ultimately. But let's face it. I mean, that's a kind of tender topic when you're a veterinary clinic. I mean, you obviously have to charge people to kill their animals. I know that sounds really horrible, but anyway, he was in my arm while I was signing the papers. And they did that deliberately because, I mean, how horrible is that? You have a dead cat and then all of a sudden you have to sign your finances away. So I was very grateful that they did that. So I signed the papers while he was alive. And then the gal poked her head in and she said, are you ready? And I just said, and actually, I'll never forget this. My mother said, I'm going to warn you. When they put the sodium pentobarbital in, it's instant. I had a long chat with her that morning when he went blind. And she said, I'm just going to warn you. When they do it, when they euthanize your cat, it is instant. So just prepare yourself. Like, you don't get like a grace period, So he tucked himself into his favorite sleeping position under my arm. And the doctor, I mean, it just couldn't have been better. It couldn't have been better the way they did it. And the doctor sat next to me, and he I shouldn't say grabbed. He took hold of Frank's paw and put the needle in. And Frank did cry a little bit because it's a needle. But he did the injection and his pupils went large, and it was over. And this might seem really macabre, but I took a picture of him dead because I knew that I would need to see it. I know how morbid that sounds, but there have been a number of people in my life where I was unable to, for whatever reason, attend the funeral, and they just kind of go on living in your brain. And I took a picture of him in my arm, dead. And they asked me what I wanted to do with this carrier, and I said keep it. He hated the thing. I called an Uber, and I went home. And my friend Mike, ordered me. I think it was on Drizzly actually. He ordered me like a big old bottle of bourbon. That was necessary, and it was used. And the next day, the thing that took me really by surprise was the whole time that I'd lived in this apartment with Frank. You know, because this is the same apartment that I shared with Frank. I never realized it, but there was a kind of, not a funk, or maybe a funk. I didn't live in a house that smelled like kitty. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. But because his litter box was in my bedroom, and the pine litter, there was a kind of organic odor that was kind of underneath everything. You know, maybe a little bit of a funk. Which, and of course, when I got home that first night, the first thing I threw away was the litter box. He hated that litter box. I threw away his litter box. I threw away, which, quite darkly, still had a few fresh poops in it. I didn't romanticize the poops. I got rid of it. But the second night I walked in, I burst into tears as soon as I walked in the door because I couldn't believe how differently it smelled. It was bizarre. It was just a clean mineral scent, I guess is the way to describe it. Anyway, I've been talking a lot. I was missing Frank tonight. And I thought instead of talking to myself the way that I normally do, I would turn on my webcam and talk to you, whoever you might be. But I'm finally, after all this time, willing to adopt a cat again. However, moving forward, I am not interested in adopting a single cat because I have too much guilt over the amount of time Frank spent by himself in this apartment. I'm not keen to repeat that mistake again. That makes me sad when I think about it. But I can't change the past. I can only use that to influence my behavior in the future. So I'm looking forward to welcoming a bonded pair into this house. And after more than 4 years, I can finally welcome cats into this house again. It can feel a bit more complete. So, thanks for listening. And hopefully the next time